All right, so we're here to review an episode from Star Trek, the original series, which is going to be one of our ongoing themes here. We're starting out with the top 10 rated as per the audience score. And the first one that we wanted to check out actually was from the second season. That's Journey to Babel. And in this episode, the USS Enterprise transports various ambassadors, including Spock's parents, to a diplomatic conference on Babel, where tensions arise over the admission of the Corridon system into the Federation. So, I actually took quite a few notes on this. I liked the episode overall, but before I get into anything that I had, anything you guys wanted to say, anything that popped out for you?
I always forget how hokey stuff from back then could be.
From the 1960s?
Like the
Yeah,
costume.
60s and 70s and whatnot. Yeah. I
Yep.
mean, they were cutting edge in a lot of their storytelling and stuff like that. On the other hand, some of it was just like whenever you have an alien race, every one of them looks the same, for the most part, unless they are specific characters in that story. Then they get to look a little different.
Yeah.
The uniforms, men wore normal uniforms. The women were in mini skirts. Yeah, it's just
That's before everybody became fat and gross, so it was actually kind of pleasant to look at, you know? It's
well, yeah,
actually
I
interesting
agree.
looking at all of that
Mhm.
and seeing the difference in like the vast majority of the people. It actually reminds me a little bit of do you remember the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and how Augustus Gloop like he was the kid, and actually if you compare him like the fat kid in the 1970s or 80s, whenever that came out, versus the more recent one, like the vast difference in what a true fat kid looks like. Like it's kind of crazy. But
Do 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 do. Yeah.
so I don't know. I had a few notes and some questions that I had. So one of the big things that comes up right off the bat is I think it was a conversation between Kirk and Spock's mother, and she's talking about the Vulcan way and then how it's logical and stuff. And this comes up quite often, right? But the notion that the Vulcan way, the idea of logic and the use of logic is it the best way? Is it the better way? And this is, a recurring thing, and I guess I have a few questions that could span out from that, because I guess it kind of depends on whether or not that's the better way, so to speak, right? But I don't think this is ever asked, and I'm not a Trekkie. I really enjoy Star Trek, but I wouldn't consider myself a Trekkie. But as far as I know, it's never actually addressed how, like, the first thing that pops to my mind, right, is all this logic and blah, 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 blah. Well, remember, Spock's half human, half Vulcan. In what logical realm or what logical reason would there have been for Spock's father to have married Spock's mother?
They addressed that in one of the movies.
They
He
don't
was
address
one.
it.
They do in one of the movies. Leonard Nimoy's character, or excuse me, Leonard Nimoy comes up later. Either way, the father says, "I was ambassador to Earth. What better way to observe the species? I thought it was logical." He says that to Spock in one of the flashbacks to the young Spock in the newer Star Trek
Oh, is that
movies.
one of the new movies? Yeah.
Yeah, with Chris Pine or whatever. I mean, I thought they were okay movies.
I mean,
But
whatever. I guess that's a
anyway, there's a
terrible fucking.
flashback, and he says that because it's a part. If I remember right, it's right before Spock makes the ultimate decision to not join the Vulcan Sciences Academy, even though he was accepted, given his, and that's what happens in the scene. The headmaster of the Vulcan Science Academy says, "Your accomplishments are noteworthy given your." Can't remember the word he uses, but effectively he
Basically
says you're
mixed blood.
handicapped.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
handicapped. your mixed breed nature, and it's at that point where Spock allows his human nature to uh, take effect take influence, and he denies the Vulcan Science Academy. But earlier on, he asks him, he's like, if everything you do, Father, is so logical, why would you marry a human woman? And he says, as an ambassador to Earth, what better way to research and understand and try to know what it is to be human than to marry one? It seemed
Which is strange, and also like why remain married, but okay, I guess we'll go with that. But speaking of that mixed heritage, and I don't really want to get into it on this, but that would be something interesting to explore, right? Because that's one of the fascinations with Spock is, he's the equivalent of a mixed race,
Yeah.
in this case mixed species, really, but kind of that duality. Because like I'd be curious, again, I don't think it's ever addressed, but why would Spock pick volcanism over
Yeah.
his humanity type of thing?
Or
Because that's where he grew up. So he wanted to be like the other kids.
But the other kids bullied him and didn't like him, right? So
Yeah, but here's the thing. Isn't it illogical to bully some other kid?
unless there's a means to an end. This is where like logic kind of it's
falls
like
apart.
what is, because I like one of my questions, right? They talk about love, and my question, well, isn't love logical? Like love would be, I mean, like at the base understanding of what logic is, right? Okay, well, here you are, you have these chemical processes going on. It makes sense to have affection. It makes sense to, have a partner, all this stuff. Like love would be a logical
I think based off
emotion.
your premise right there, and that's where think you could make the argument that this whole logic argument for volcanism is inherently flawed. Is that, like you said, it's the logical culmination of resultant factors of whatever stimuli or condition you're experiencing. Like you brought up a specific point, which they're obviously well versed in chemicals, these chemical reactions within the body, neurological stimuli, electro-neurological stimuli, et cetera, et cetera. So the logical conclusion of getting punched in the face is some form of response. It's logical to
It's
get pissed
logical to
off.
get angry. It's logical
It's
to respond.
logical to get
Exactly.
angry and to retaliate. Right.
That's what, when one of the person who had infiltrated and is acting as a spy or a Confederate on the ship and everything,
The fake Andorian.
yeah, the fake Andorian. The leader of the Andorians was there talking with Spock, and he's talking about how all you consider is logic. This was a really fascinating conversation, actually, right?
love
Is
that
because you're looking at, well, why would somebody engage in this behavior? And everything you come to a conclusion of is that they wouldn't, because it would be illogical. And he says, well, you might want to consider passion or gain, right? Which would be, again, in my understanding, that would be a logical thing to think of. Well, why would somebody do something? Well, it doesn't have to have a necessary means to an end, right? It's logical that an illogical person would behave in a certain way. So you should consider that from a logical standpoint.
And you just made another perfect point. Logical is relative.
Right.
What's the ideology of the person whose logic is being brought into question? What's the theology of the person whose logic is being brought into question? So there's all the different levels to it. But yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of that episode, where he says, "Well, that's the problem. You're looking in the wrong places. Look at passion. Look at where one has passion or gain, and that's where you'll find your murder."
Well, that's where I was hoping that, and it didn't happen. I was hoping that was what was going to prompt Spock to understand and figure out what happened, was that he was then going to look at it from that human side, and actually understand, well, okay, through acts of passion or rage or whatever, gain possibly. And his dad was talking to his mother at some point, because his mother was talking to Bones and Kirk about when Spock was a kid and he had, quote unquote, a teddy bear sort of thing or whatever. It wasn't really a teddy bear, but anyway, his dad basically, was saying that you shouldn't embarrass Spock like that, because he deserves respect as his rank in the Starfleet as an officer, all of this. And his mother's going back and forth to that a little bit, but the question is, and I'm curious to hear your answer before I kind of give mine. But can Spock be embarrassed?
Well, I would
Yes,
have to say
yes,
yes.
yes.
Elaborate.
Well, he's half human. And I see I'm not sure if logic is a genetic thing with them or a cultural thing. Because it seems that there's Vulcans on one end of the spectrum, humans in the middle, and then Romulans, which look exactly like Vulcans, but they are emotion driven rather than logic driven, right? But Vulcans still have their fight to the death over mating stuff. That's pretty emotional. And Romulans were still able to conquer space, which takes a lot of logical processes. So,
I think it's addressed that no, they do have emotions, but they suppress them through their whatever meditative practices or
right,
Yeah,
so
they
it's
use it through
cultural.
control of the mind. So
yeah.
they're capable of it. It's just they don't.
Right, so
That's
it's
here's
cultural.
here that
Yeah.
and that's another problem with it's another problem with Star Trek and any of these series that have massive amounts of not only film but television shows, films, literature. There's a big universe out there in terms of what's been done, and whenever it comes to embarrassment, in some of the newer films, the Leonard Nimoy, whenever James Kirk is abandoned on whatever ice planet, and Leonard Nimoy he runs into him in this ice cave or what have you. There's a moment where Spock admits to his embarrassment and things of that nature, and there's moments where his newer character is the human human Vulcan dichotomy of his nature is much more on display. It becomes more of a part of it to whereas it's more realistic in my opinion in the newer ones. Whereas and again, maybe it's not more realistic. Maybe because, like Steven said, it is true that that whole Vulcan ability to detach themselves from emotion is by way of that Vulcan meditation practice and cutting their brain into this logical pathway, whatever. But yes, in terms of the world of Star Trek, he can be embarrassed. And I think that just from a personal answer, speaking to that world and to Spock's character, my opinion is that yes, Spock can and does get embarrassed. It's like, for instance, do we think that Spock would have ever let on that they were his parents if nobody else ever had? Like, unless it had come up because of Kirk's question. How long would it have been before Spock ever brought that up to the crew?
Yeah, maybe.
I don't
Well, so
think Spock
that
would have.
What
probably
is it?
not.
His
Would you
mother
say?
might have, but I don't think Spock would have.
Yeah, I don't think Spock would have.
Well, that's why I don't really like the newer stuff as much because I think it tries to play too much into current day
It tries to
and
make it meta.
humanize stuff and everything. And it's like,
Yeah,
no,
I
no.
agree.
But with that being said, my question, I guess, maybe I should rephrase it because even though I said, can Spock be embarrassed? Let me rephrase it to, can Vulcans be embarrassed?
Well,
Well,
I think
I don't think so because of their mindset. I believe their just sense of superiority because they're so 100% invested in the belief that their logic is 100% sound. I mean, we notice throughout that world that they are one of the, if not the preeminent deciding voice of influence on the councils, these intergalactic councils and things of that nature. So, in the event that they, as a people, somebody, or whether an individual or a group of Vulcans do something, or the Vulcan society as a whole decides to do something, I don't think that they can be embarrassed because of their belief that they're completely righteous in their logic, unless, of course, somebody's able to put a law to, or excuse me, put a lie to that logic. In which case, then yes, I'd imagine that they would be able to be embarrassed.
I would say that I disagree with James or with J3. I think that they can be, because we've established that their logic is based in their culture. It is not based in their DNA. So they're not limited to logic by their physiology. They are using logic as a cultural norm. And I think that despite whatever a norm is, there are occasions where you could do something unintentional and the consequences would be embarrassing. So yes, I think that a Vulcan could be embarrassed.
So my take on it is that
Individually, I'd agree.
is that both yes and no, depending on how you look at it, right?
Yeah.
And that would be, so from an emotional standpoint, do they themselves feel the what it means to be embarrassed?
Or are they
Probably
logically
not.
embarrassed by the
But
circumstances?
logically understanding how others would view the situation,
Exactly.
yes, embarrassment can happen, right? You walk in, your pants are gone.
Well, if
Well,
you
to me, it wouldn't matter, but if everybody's looking and laughing, even though it might not affect me in an emotional way, you could logically conclude that this would be an embarrassing situation, right?
I think I
That's kind of
think
where I'm at.
I agree with that. That's the best way to put it. It's yes or no based on circum, and that's the biggest thing. It's like, can they be embarrassed? And that's why I think it's a yes and no, and it all depends on whether you believe in that. Whether it's like, what was I talking about? Oh, about the yes no. I think Star Trek does a pretty good job, in my opinion, of showing how Vulcans logically interpret human emotions, or just emotions of other creatures in general, by the way that they apologize. For instance, they'll say something along the lines of, "I'm sorry for the way my actions made you feel," or whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
that in and of itself speaks to the fact that they have the ability to ascertain, by reading people's body language and understanding, circumstance of social situations and etiquette, whether or not something is a faux pas or should cause embarrassment, and then they can act accordingly. But whether or not they actually feel that emotion inherently, yeah, who knows?
That's where, so the final thing that I had on this episode, which I kind of wanted to talk about, was Spock's mother, because I'm of two minds with it. So she's been married. She's been living the Vulcan life for however many decades. She should understand how Vulcans operate. In fact, Spock even says that to her. But she basically tries to manipulate and guilt Spock into giving up command and helping his father in all of this, which I found interesting because at the very beginning of the episode, she's talking about how it's the Vulcan way, it's the logical way, it's the better way, blah 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 blah. But then you get towards the end of the episode when this is all happening, and she's trying to manipulate Spock, like, this is your father, he should take
She says,
precedent.
and then she
Basically,
says,
all
"I'll
the
hate you
human,
forever."
yeah. Which I'm of two minds. On the one hand, I'm like, you're really crappy as a person because you should understand this, but at the same time I give some grace because she's also human, right? And that's a human emotion to
Yeah, for
behave
sure.
in a way counter to what you were just talking about.
Yeah, I, I I get it. The only thing I didn't like about it, I'm completely fine with the way the mother reacted. The thought that, not only is the ship under attack, did they know? Yeah, she knew that because Spock told her. Not only is the ship under potential attack, but there's also the fact that she says it. She says, "I won't lose both of you," or "I don't want to lose both of you." And, that's a very human reaction. People are going to say things that they may not mean. I mean, people say things they don't mean all the time when they're under duress. So I'm willing to let that go. The only thing I really didn't like was the "I'll hate you forever." And that to me shows that, and that's the thing that I think kind of goes unseen, because if you harken back to when she talks about how Spock would run around and play, even though he thought nobody saw it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then when she says that, the statement that "I'll hate you for the rest of my life," trying to play on his emotions, because she understands that Spock is still a partially emotional creature because of that human nature he still has in him. So I thought that was kind of a very shitty thing of a mother to do, especially knowing that her son had that problem with his dichotomous nature his entire life, and
Well,
that
it's
this was already a
also
very difficult decision.
yeah, and it's also a little bit bizarre because maybe I missed something or don't recall correctly, but she was very you said it. She said that she didn't want to lose she couldn't bear losing both of them or whatever, right? So she was very much aware that Spock giving blood could kill him, and it also, the procedure could result in the husband not being alive anyway, and so she could lose both her son and her husband. So why pressure Spock into doing something that you just said you couldn't handle losing both to begin with?
Right.
So that was a little bizarre as well. But that's all I had on the episode. I thought it was a decent one. It's definitely not up there actually with any. It would not be in my top 10 for Star Trek the original series.
All right, I want to get one other thing. What were your thoughts on the fake antenna?
What about it?
It made sense. Why?
Well,
He was
I
surgically
don't know.
altered. He was a
See, it goes
surgically
back to
altered
that.
specimen.
Okay, well, then they did such an amazing job that even native aliens couldn't tell this guy from themselves. And on top of that, how did he get into the retinue?
Deep
Yeah, I
state.
don't know. I don't think, did we ever learn who they were?
Yeah, yeah,
Who were they?
they were a neutral nation that wanted the war to take effect so that they could sell lithium to both sides.
Right, they could profit, but did we know exactly what their species was?
Yeah, they said it,
Okay.
but then
I mean,
everyone on the little ship died, and so did the
yeah.
spy. So
I don't know. I mean, I guess if you wanted to nitpick, you could look into that. I mean, I don't disagree. It's something to look at, but at the same time, we're talking about mass advancements in technology. I mean, like, they can beam people for God's sakes, right? Like, I'm sure that they could do some cosmetic surgeries and things like that to get somebody in. I mean, it's a good point, but I find it, yeah, I can believe it in this world as a possibility.
okay, I'll go along with that. It's funny
I
though.
mean, it just reminds me of, like, other films like Mission Impossible, right? Okay, well, we're gonna have to create your whole identity. We're gonna get the name badge and make sure that it works on the scanners. This is how you infiltrate. You know what I mean? It's like they figure out a way to infiltrate, and it
Yeah.
works at least for a short time.
I don't mind that. The thing if I'm gonna nitpick, and you can do that with anything, but one of the things that always got me about it is Dr. McCoy when it comes to working on Vulcans is you're a medical doctor within Starfleet. It just seems strange to me that a doctor that is
Can only
working
work on
on
humans.
staff members that are because the members of Starfleet are intergalactic. There's people from all over the galaxy that work in Starfleet or are members of Starfleet. You've got Klingons, you've got Andorians, you've got Caledonians or whatever they are. You got all these different things. So you're telling me that when these doctors graduate from Starfleet med school, they've never once done cadaver work on a Vulcan. They've never done cadaver work on a Romulan. It seems
It
very
is
odd to me.
it is a little annoying. Now, granted, I think in the original series, I think Spock's the only other species that's on the ship. Now, in Next Generation and stuff, yes,
Yeah,
there's lots of
yeah.
other species. With that being said, though, two big things. A, you are literally an expeditionary force. You're going out searching for new planets, being able to help, like all this type of stuff. So you should have knowledge of other species and ability to help and all that.
Well, he says he's
Secondly,
got the knowledge, but no hands-on.
well, that's what I was going to say. Secondly, is you literally have all the knowledge, right, because of your computer system. So this is how you do all that. So to an extent, but you would think at the very least, if your second in command is this species, you would learn
How to
at
work on
least, yeah,
them.
basics on what to do. Yeah,
Thank you. But
yeah. I
other than
mean,
that,
like,
yeah.
I could understand, not knowing this, that, or the other. Though, again, this is it's so refreshing. I'm loving watching this. I was a big fan of Next Generation, and now that I'm watching the original, I love it. And there's actually a lot of repeats in Next Generation, but man, even as like, corny as some of the stuff is and outdated and everything, I don't
Still
care.
good.
You are stuck in because the writing is so good.
So
And
good.
that's
Yeah.
been missing for well over 5 to 10 years now in most things. And so
Most definitely.
it's really fascinating how much you can talk about some of the stuff. But yeah, I enjoyed it. It's not in my top 10 though.
Did anybody else find it kind of strange that there's not a single fucking person on deck 5 when Kirk was getting attacked?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Some
that
kind
might
of
be the officer's deck,
Yeah,
their
whatever.
private quarters.
I'm just saying.
could be. Well, that's always one of the funny things that I find about this whole thing. So there's two big things. One, why aren't there cameras everywhere on this ship or some type of monitoring thing, right? Or as advanced as you are. Now, I could argue that, well, it's only inhabited by, moral upstanding, blah, 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 blah. But then my counter argument is how many episodes, every single one, does some shit go down on the ship where it really would have been nice to have some cameras or some type of monitoring thing to figure out what's going on, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
wild to me how many people are like supposed to be in sick bay and they just get up and wander out and they're, going out and killing
Yeah.
people or screwing things up or what have you. It's like, why is there no eyes on this person?
Well, it's just like in Journey to Babel when they bring in the assassin and they're questioning him. It's like, dude's not in handcuffs. He's
Yeah,
literally like after as they're baiting them in to shoot him, he's just leaned up against the bridge command center, like, what? You're baiting them? Oh damn, he's just hanging out. And then after they shoot him, he's still hanging out. I'm like, all right.
yeah, it's ridiculous. Well, that's where like they have all the ambassadors on there, and the first Corridon ambassador or whatever is killed, and it's like, okay, wouldn't it have been nice to be tracking where people were at or have a monitor, whatever. It's
Yeah.
yeah, they just don't.
Overall, it's not a bad episode. One last thing though, if anybody that happens to watch this goes and watches this episode, just something to pay attention to that I always find funny is pay attention when Kirk gets stabbed. Pay attention to where he gets stabbed, and he is clearly stabbed in the lower back. Yeah. And then later on, when we see Kirk in the sick bay, McCoy states that he just centimeters away from having his heart punctured and his entire upper chest is bandaged. So just a funny little
A little lack of
discontinuity that I thought was
continuity.
funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was pretty funny.
It was a
All right.
big knife.
Yeah.
Yeah. Paul
All
Hogan.
right. Well, good review. We'll be back with one of the other top 10 episodes shortly. Until then, take care.